Here we go, we're up to Daf Mem Aleph Amud Base, and the Gemara, we got up to the case where we just discussed the different opinions in regard to whether the need for the psukim, the order of the pasuk of Eretz Chitz Gefen, is telling me the halachas of all the different measurements of the Torah, or is it telling me the order in which we should say brachas? The Gemara seemingly rejects the notion that it's teaching me the actual measurements, because it says those are halacha l'Moshe Misinai, and already the pasuk then would be open to be learned, the Seder HaBrachas, and possibly according to everyone. Even Reb Chanan, who uses this pasuk to learn the brachas out of, we could say that it's nasmachta ba'alma for him as well. Unsure, something to look into. Rav Chisda, Rav Amnuna have a yasu b'sudas. Rav Chisda and Rav Amnuna were sitting down at a meal. I said, "Kamayu tomorrow very morning." They brought in front of them dates and pomegranates. Shaka Rav Amnuna baruch at tamari. So Rav Amnuna took the dates and he made a bracha and then bereisha at first. Amar Rav Chisda lo yisrael leimar l'had Amar Rav Yosef tem Reb Yitzchak kol hamukdam b'pasuk zeh kohen bracha. He said Rav Chisda back to Rav Amnuna, but don't you hold of what Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak said, that if it's in the order the pasuk comes first, you should say it first. And the way the pasuk goes, Eretz chitus oyer, wheat, barley, v'gefen, grapes, tein, fig, v'rimon. So rimon is fifth. And then it says Eretz Zeis Shemen Dvash, and ready olives are sixth, and tamar is seventh. So he took the seventh one and he made the bracha before the fifth one. What was he doing? Amar Lei replied Rav Hamnuna, Zeh Sheni La'aretz v'Zeh Chamish La'aretz. Since in the verse it repeats the word Eretz twice, it says Eretz Chito Sa'ora v'Gefen Sein Rimoin, boom, Eretz Zeh Shemen Dvash. So both Eretzes somehow need to be, the order is in proximity to the word Eretz. So really Rimoin therefore is fifth, whereas Tamarim are second. So obviously they trump Rimon. Now what would happen if you have a Chitus Area, which are first and second, barley and wheat, and you have Zeis and Dvash, which are first and second to the second Oretz. So that means if you've got, let's say, an olive and a wheat dish, which one takes preference? They both have the same proximity towards the word Eretz. Tosfos points out, then you'd go after the first Eretz takes precedence. So there's like kind of two levels of precedence. The first Eretz has a precedent over the second Eretz, but the second Eretz, its proximity has a preference over something which is further away from the word, and therefore when you have dates and pomegranates, go for the dates first. If you have olives and grapes, go for the olives first. And if you have wheat with a wheat cracker with herring, enjoy. Continues the Gemara and says, Amar le man yovlon nagri de parzela v'nashmi inoch. So after hearing this understanding, Rav Chisda said, who would give us legs of steel, of iron, and we would go and serve you? He says it's to Rav Hamnuna, meaning he was so impressed by Rav Hamnuna's analysis of the pasuk to come to this conclusion that he wished he could just follow him around everywhere to learn from his way of being. Now we go into a very commonplace halacha and really examining the nature by which when we do have bread and we don't make other brachas during that meal, why is it we don't make those other brachas? And there's going to be an astonishing difference between Rashi and Tosfos. So if you are learning Rashi along with the Gemara, you're going to be caught quite off guard, because Rashi seems to take a very specific approach to how the sugya goes. We will mention it briefly and then contrast it with Tosfos. Itmar is a crucial, critical Talmudic key phrase introducing a machlokes amaroim. Hevi lifneim te'eni v'anoni anavim b'sei chasuda. They brought in front of them figs and grapes in the middle of the meal, and of course, based on our previous sugya, we'd obviously make the bracha on, if they would come alone, correct, grapes before figs. But now this is in the middle. You've already washed, and now this is brought within the context of your meal. So Rav Huna says you do have to make a borer priyat beforehand, but you can rely on benching to exempt them afterwards. You don't have to say aloetz. V'chein Rav Nachman supports him. Tuni bracha lifneim ve'tunim bracha lachreim. They require bracha beforehand and not a bracha afterwards. Rav Sheshis argues. Rav Sheshis Amar tuni bracha bein lifneim bein lachreim. So if a person has grapes in the middle of a meal, he makes borer priyat, then he makes another 8, apart from the fact that he's going to bench. Why is that, says Rav Sheshes, because where do you ever have a thing that requires a bracha beforehand and doesn't require a bracha afterwards? The only time you have that is that's only when it comes to this bread. I'm going to use the word bread, but we may even use the word cake, that comes together with cooked wheat kernels. That's the only time that you make a bracha beforehand and not a bracha afterwards. But otherwise, you always need a bracha before and afterwards, and therefore, since the grapes and the figs are not coming as a part of the meal, and we'll see in Rashi what that means, so therefore they're completely independent and they function in their own world of brachas. They need a bracha before and a bracha afterwards. Interestingly enough, this is how Rashi understands the sugya. He understands that the power of hamoitzi to exempt other things within the meal is only when they are eaten together with the bread. You're using them to enhance the bread. They're what's called la lefes esapas. They give the bread relish. So, for example, things that should be obvious would be hummus. You're using it as a bread thing. But everything else that you eat together with bread, the bread exempts it. Something which is not eaten together with bread, why in the world should the bread exempt it? Which makes a lot of sense, and therefore things which are coming to be eaten individually, cake is unto hate. Eat them, but make a bracha before, and according to Rav Nachman, not afterwards, because Birkas Hamazon will take care of that. According to Rav Sheshes, even afterwards. Now, what is this comparison to Pasuk Bar B'Kisnin that Rav Sheshes says you don't make a bracha afterwards, but you do make a bracha before? Rashi explains it was this elaborate kind of a cake that you mixed into the dough a whole variety of different spices and nuts, and then you formed it in these exotic shapes of birds and trees, and you ate a very little of it together with these wheat kernels after you'd already benched. So we're talking about something which is coming after the meal completely, and you make a mazonis beforehand, and the implication of Rashi is even though you had a kazais, you don't make an alamicha afterwards. He compares it to rice and millet. He says just like there you make a bracha beforehand of mazonis, you don't make a bracha afterwards, so to here, implying that there would be a requirement in terms of the measurement, but you still don't make a bracha afterwards because they're not considered mazonis dike enough for an alamicha, which is a difficult approach in terms of the Gemara, because the Gemara is drawing a comparison between things that come within the Suda, according to Rav Sheshes, to things which are completely unrelated to the Suda. He says the only thing that needs a bracha before and not a bracha afterwards is Pasuk Bar B'Kisnin. But he's just using it as a generalized comparison that to prove that things that you require before brachas require after brachas, even though it's not comparable in the fact that this is after the Suda and we are discussing within the Suda. According to Rav Sheshes, the fact that this is not eaten together with hamoitzi makes it a completely and totally unrelated item, and therefore it functions as an independent food, not in any way influenced by hamoitzi. Now Tosfos will argue on that, and he'll introduce a notion which I think is more familiar to us, that hamoitzi is some kind of super bracha that encapsulates anything that occurs within that Suda. In order for us to fully explore this, we would need to look in the poskim, which I strongly recommend. Amar Rav Papa, so comes along, the Gemara now says, after introducing us to this machlokes amoraim, which really is one long statement, and now part 2 of the Gemara is those opinions, both of Nachman and Rav Sheshes, all of those seem to argue the Reb Chia. The Reb Chia has this global rule that bread exempts all other foods, and wine exempts all other drinks, and at this point in time it sounds that this is categorical, that it doesn't matter if it's coming because of the bread, not coming because of the bread. Bread is a superpower. Anything you eat within the context and the time whereby eating bread is not considered its liable for its own bracha. And 9 part 3 comes along a papa and he says, Hilchas Halach is Droima boy machmas asuda, things which come because of the meal, b'soich asuda, and they're within the meal. Ain't tuni bracha lo lifnei v'lo acharei. They don't require bracha before and afterwards. And the way Rashi explains it, he goes back to his previous principle, that this is talking about when they eat them together with the bread. Therefore, the bread is the thing that exempts them. Machmas asuda, because of the suda, means they are drawn there because of the bread. That's what the suda means. And we'll see Tosfos would argue with that, and yet say it's because of the meal. Which is a little bit, I suppose, in the words, according to Rashi, it should say "B'ay machmas alechem," not machmas asuda. Good point. V'shaloi machmas asuda, and things which are not coming, according to Rashi, because of the bread. B'soich asuda tuin bracha lifnei ve'en tuin bracha lacharem. If they're within the suda, they need a bracha beforehand, but the birkas hamazon will cover them, and they won't need a bracha afterwards. La'achar asuda, but if you eat them after you've already benched, tuin bracha ben lifnei ben lacharem, they need a bracha before and afterwards. It's interesting why the Gemara needs to add that on. What would you have thought? You've already finished eating. Why, because you once ate a meal, should that exempt you from any bracha before or afterwards, is a question you need to ask yourself. And that draws to a close part 3 of the Gemara. So even though this is a very short Gemara, this is enormously important for our day-to-day bread eating activities and benching, and really requires an elaborate discussion, and we just kind of scratching the surface of the surface. Shalu es ben Zoyma. The students asked the great Tana ben Zoyma, why is it, they said, that things which come because of the meal do not require a bracha before, neither afterwards? He says because the bread exempts us. So according to Rashi, this makes quite a lot of sense, because they're eating it because of the bread. The bread is the ikar, they're the tafel, so they're exempt by the bread. One of Tosfos' claims on Rashi is, yeah, but that's normal ikar and tafel. Why do we need there's no special dinim over here? Why are we describing it individually? According to Rashi, it is a shtickle problematic, but he says, pas b'josam, because I'm eating them together with the bread, therefore the bread exempts them. So the Gemara says in part 5, if this is true, yain namin iftarei pas. So then the bread should also exempt wine, because of course the wine comes as a result of the meal. Now this way Rashi gets tricky. Okay, this is one of the Tosfos' major kashas on Rashi. He says, well, you don't dip the bread in the wine, so what do you mean that the wine is coming because of the bread? It's not becoming because of the bread. You're not eating it together with the bread. Very, very good question. And Rashi doesn't even explain this line of the Gemara, so we're at a bit of a loss for Rashi. Either way, the Gemara in part 6 answers, Shani yain dugoyim bracha lasmo. Yain is so important that it causes a bracha of itself, meaning in many places Rashi says, you make a bracha individually on wine, and meaning that the need for ber pegofen, for example, kiddush on Shabbos day, or the Brachos erisin at a chuppah, all those things require wine. So we see wine is not going to be ruled out, even though there's a presence of bread in the room. Huge sugya, massive discussions in the poskim, something to research and investigate and expand our knowledge of what we eat and what we bless.